Thank you very much for coming. I'm very honored to have the committee invite me to do this talk as well as be a candidate for the director position of IPRC. I've been involved with IPRC for about maybe 6 years, 7 years. Been here at UNC for 13 years now, and I've had very interesting 10 years of CDC project funding to do different types of community-based work, which I'll tell you about. But one thing in my background that, as I go along, I'd like to emphasize some of my strengths as a potential director. And one of the things that I've done over the years is I've stressed in my own work an interdisciplinary focus. And in that, you can see I went from social work, which is it was an interdisciplinary degree. It was actually in social welfare, not in social work. And I had background in family studies and sociology there at the University of Wisconsin. Then I moved to developmental psychology for my postdoc work. I was studying children under stress and adversity and how they develop resilience. And then when I came here, I was able to have a K award from the CDC that also exposed me to public health. So I really like to integrate different disciplinary foci as well as different types of research methodologies in my work. And this, I think, would be a strength as a potential director because I sort of know the different jargon and socialization processes from these social sciences and like to form projects that kind of cross-pollinate some of those issues. So I'm also proud, this is another aspect that I think would be a strength. I'm proud of my own research portfolio. I'll tell you about the types of projects that I've done in a minute. But what I want to say, I've taken a little bit of a different tact than Steve Marshall did last week. I was able to see his talk. And he focused much more on the history and an orientation to the injury field. And I highly recommend his talk with those issues. I think that some people don't know me as well. And so what I am trying to do with my presentation here is give you an orientation to my background and what I would look like as a potential director. And that's my major focus. So I do have a track record of funding from the CDC. I've had several projects over the last 10 years funded by them. As a PI at UNC, I've generated about $10 million worth of external funding. Most of that has been, well, almost all of it has been federal funding. And again, the most consistent funding source I've had is from the CDC. And so in our current project that I'll orient you to in just a moment, I speak to the CDC program officers every other week and have a very high level of interaction with staff at the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control from the CDC. So I want to orient you a little bit to the type of research that I do. Across the years, I've been involved in a number of studies across different disciplines. In my early work, we were looking at the evaluation of effectiveness of the Child Parent Center programs in Chicago. So this was an early intervention program. As Sam mentioned, his field and mine kind of overlap, and this was the beginning of my work in this area. After that, I came here, and I had worked at school-based prevention with Mark Fraser and Maida Galinsky in the School of Social Work. They created the Making Choices program, and this was a third grade aggressive behavior prevention program for kids. And we launched and tested it in a number of schools in Chatham County, and then it grew larger. And it was tested in Hope County schools as part of a CDC project that was larger. Then I started creating other projects, and I was looking for an important issue for the state. I had, come to North Carolina and really wanted to be in touch with community issues. And so I got funding from the CDC to devise a youth violence prevention program for Latino immigrant families who were adjusting to the stresses of the new cultural system. And we created the Entre Dos Mundos, Between Two Worlds program, and we did a community-based randomized clinical trial of this program and found that it had significant effects in lowering youth aggression and increasing parent-child communication and bonding and lowering parent-child conflict in immigrant families. Then I created another project called the Latino Acculturation and Health Project, and that's a longitudinal study that we did here in North Carolina and in Arizona. We followed 300 Latino families to look over time at their trajectories of both acculturation, how they adjusted to the new cultural system, as well as how that impacted trajectories of aggressive behavior and youth violence. So what I'm trying to show here is I have one foot in the intervention world, in the prevention programming development world, and one foot in the longitudinal work. Then dominating everything else in my life right now, I got funding for the North Carolina Academic Center for Excellence in Youth Violence Prevention, which is a large center grant, and not a center the way that we think about it on campus, but a cooperative agreement with the CDC that created this Youth Violence Center. And I'm going to talk with you more about what that looks like in just a minute. So in terms of intervention research, we have different developmental stages as a prevention scientist. And so what I want to show is that there's these different phases go from epidemiology to conceptualization of risk and protective processes. And then we have program design based on theoretical risk and protective factors. We then can create programs from the design and then test their efficacy, and then later on their effectiveness in community trials, which leads to a dissemination focus. And then these developmental stages have feedback so that it's an iterative process to get a finished product. So what I want to show is that as a prevention scientist, my work with the Chicago longitudinal study in the child parent centers was really about effectiveness testing and then the dissemination. Can these centers, as they were shown to be effective, can we move them and all have equal effectiveness in other places? Then with the Making Choices project, we were earlier in the process looking at efficacy testing and then larger scale effectiveness. With Entre Dos Mundos, I started from the very beginning. This was where the CDC also takes more risks than some other funders, and we didn't have an intervention at that point. They funded us to create one. And so we're at the very beginning of the process with going from epidemiology all the way to creating our own intervention and testing it out. With my longitudinal study, we did deal with epidemiology and then looking at risk and protective factors. And then finally with NC-ACE, we have our fingers and toes in every piece of the process. We're taking evidence-based practices and putting them into the community, testing out the effectiveness in a very new setting, and seeing if the package that we put together can bring youth violence rates down in Robinson County. So in terms of my administrative experience, I have had these diverse projects, and what have they done in terms of giving me the experience to be a center director? Well, first of all, I've had the experience of creating a center from nothing, which has been a very interesting experience, putting all the protocols into place, hiring the correct faculty and staff, getting a coalition together, forming an advisory board. And so I really have had a lot of pre-award proposal development as well as post-award administration, especially in this last project. Because it's been so large, I've done everything from working with Tanya on human resources issues to putting a subcontract into place that's very, very about $500,000 subcontract, and everything from dealing with making sure there's supplies for our office in Lumberton to trying to negotiate indirect costs between IPRC and social work and whatnot. So I believe that in that process and with my other grants, I've developed a strong relationship with CDC. As I mentioned, I've had 10 years of experience with working with their project officers and have a very high degree of interaction with them bi-weekly at the moment. So I've managed budgets that exceed $1.3 million a year. So in terms of resource allocation and trying to budget for the needs of complicated projects, I have experience with that. And I already mentioned we've done the whole hiring process for about 15 to 20 staff members that goes at both UNC and in the community through a subcontract with the health department. So I've done a lot of supervision of staff and faculty, and so we also have developed community coalitions and advisory boards, and we have a training program on youth violence prevention where we sponsor lectures, and we have pre-doctoral fellows that work with us. So in terms of all of the functions, day-to-day functions of a center, I have experience from the last 2 years of putting those, all these pieces into place. But I don't want to be selling myself or chosen as a director based on my management experience. Why don't I want that? Because really what's more important to me is the criteria that I would be selected as a leader in ideas or a leader in being able to provide visionary leadership. And that's where I really enjoy creating these projects in terms of devising new ideas, new programs that can be put into place and testing them out. And that's what's exciting to me. I do the other administrative piece, usually in collaboration with those who know much more about the university rules and regulations than I do. So I do want to be, I am stressing throughout that I am a big idea guy and not necessarily your detailed day-to-day administration guy. So this is proof here, a little evidence of how my research projects have grayed my hair. I used to blame it on my sons, but I really think that it's probably more research administration. So I want to give you a little orientation of what have we created in this NCA Center grant, because I think that that'll give you an example of why I am labeling myself kind of a big idea leader, not necessarily the manager. And so here in 2010, the FOA came out from the CDC to create youth violence prevention. They call them Academic Centers for Excellence in Youth Violence Prevention. Here were the rules of the game. They wanted us to identify a high-risk community, a community that already was manifesting high levels of youth violence, and you had to show those levels through administrative data. Then the idea was to create a multi-component prevention package that you would put into place with the community and evaluate its effectiveness. And in evaluating the effectiveness, they wanted community-level impact, which is really hard. I typically, in my background, have been an individual-focused guy. Family-level work child skills training in the 3rd grade with making choices. So community level impact is a really big and adventurous idea that the CDC had. It's a big risk and a big thing to ask for, but that's our aim in this center grant. And finally, we do have a training program in youth violence prevention, again, for pre-doctoral students and lectures on campus. So I went about looking at the administrative data that was available to me. I had to pick out a youth violence, a community that was manifesting high levels of youth violence. And as you can see from this chart, the counties that have the highest rates have the highest populations. They are, there we go. They are Wake County, and then you have Mecklenburg County and Guilford County with Greensboro, so our metropolitan areas. But the interesting piece of this to me was that they have the largest populations, and when I started calling around, they also had the largest amount of resources, and they had sort of fragmented idea. What is a community within Wake County? There's lots of different things, and some of the other centers under this funding mechanism had taken 3 blocks of Richmond, Virginia, and then compared to the next 3 blocks. And that really wasn't our way that we went about thinking about this. So the interesting part here was when you look at the second tier. So the not the full blue, but the shaded blue. And what you see is that there's counties that are struggling with youth violence issues that are rural and really have very few resources. And then when you add to that that issue of rurality, the diversity that you have in Robson County, that brought us to really try and focus on Robson County as our target community. It's a fascinating context for trying to do this work, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But you can see, before I leave this slide, that there are many areas in North Carolina that could be engaged with the same type of process that I've used with Robson County. Many rural areas have come to me after I got this funding and say, wouldn't it be great if we could do this in Hope County? Can you come? And of course I have to say, well, the next time I have $1 million grant, I can come and try and do this. But what we have is a model for how we can engage other areas. And one thing that I've been talking with different stakeholders about all day is I have this applied intervention focus. And I would like to bring that to this role of director of CDC. Oh my gosh, that's a really big job. All right, director of IPRC. And really try and increase the engagement process that we have and focus work for the future on kind of this community-based process. Okay, so our response to this FOA was to create the North Carolina Academic Center for Excellence in Youth Violence Prevention, and we're focusing on Robson County as a unique context. And what we're going to do 2 things, 2 major things: put into place prevention programs, both universal and targeted for high-risk youth. And then we're going to, as part of the evaluation piece, follow 5,000 kids from Robson and Columbus counties to see how their trajectories of both healthy and aggressive behavior change over the course of the 5 years of the study. So this is a major longitudinal study that's kind of an added piece to our evaluation program. And the main big idea here is to try and move the needle on youth violence rates in Robeson County as a whole, which is an enormous project. It's larger than anything that I've tried to tackle so far. It's very ambitious, but again, I think that that's the excitement for me in creating this type of new initiative. Okay, and so why Robeson County? Here's a few examples why it was such a good context. First of all, it's really one of the most impoverished, unfortunately, one of the most impoverished counties in the state in terms of struggling with economic issues. They had a major manufacturing plant for sneakers that moved overseas a few years ago, and that it lost 40% of its private sector workforce because of that. It's like many rural areas, it's struggled with these resource issues. It's also incredibly diverse context in terms of integrating different racial groups, which is a fascinating part of Robeson County. It's the community that has the largest non-reservation community of Native Americans east of the Mississippi, and I believe in terms of non-reservation in the whole country. And this is the Lumbee tribe, and so it's an incredibly diverse place, and many of our prevention programs simply have not been tested at all in terms of their effectiveness with such diverse communities. So this was an added benefit, you know, to try and understand how these programs would work in this type of context. Unfortunately, the homicide rate in Robeson County is 4 times the national average, and you can see down below, this is a long-standing problem. This data shows from 1992 onward, it's been significantly higher than the state rate for both youth violence, age-adjusted death rates for youth, and homicide rates. So this is basically what we have created. It's with the Center Grant, we have the same type of cores. We have an administrative core, a evaluation and program implementation core, and a training core. And then in the middle, what you see here are the programs that we put into place for our programming. The yellow box shows that we've launched universal program for all kids in middle school throughout the entire county. So we're working with almost 5,000 middle school kids, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So this is a huge undertaking. We work with about 60 teachers to put that kind of programming into place. And then the 2 purple boxes are targeted interventions. One is teen court, to divert high-risk youth from the juvenile justice system. And then secondly, we have Parenting Wisely, which is a program for high-risk parents to try and connect them with their youth, with their adolescents, decrease conflict and increase communication, and work on parenting issues. I'm proud that Wanda Hammonds has come here she is the head of that program for us, and a lifelong Robeson County resident. So Wanda can tell you later how that kind of a program is impacting the county. I'm also very proud of our staff and how we've been able to make community relationships over the last year and a half. And that what you see in the aqua at the bottom are all of the community partners that we've made over the course of the grant. And this is a long list. Wanda can add probably 30 more to that list at the bottom. But the health department, you know, the public schools system, the Lumbee tribe, the NAACP, all of it, because it's a rural context, we were able to bring all of these major community providers together in a coalition to get them on the same page to invest in lowering youth violence. And that's one thing that was really unique in being able to do that with a rural community. Okay, so some of the highlights from year 1 and year 2, and then I'm going to move on to just talk about IPRC. You know, in our work, we've launched these interventions. We've also collected data on 5,000 kids across Robeson County and Columbus County. And we've created a youth violence prevention coalition, made a great number of agency partnerships, and not just with the agencies, but also with the universities, UNC Pembroke, UNC Greensboro, NC State's extension program down in Robeson County. So one thing that I want to stress in giving you all this information is how I've been able to, with my staff, be kind of a connector, connecting the big issue of youth violence to make these partnerships in a community that's 2.5 hours away. So it's not convenient, but and there was a lot of trust building and testing of me as an outsider and as a researcher. They had not, many had not had good experiences with researchers in the past, and so there was a lot of testing of my leadership, which, you know, I think that I've passed most of those tests, and we continue to work on issues of collaboration. So I think that the same types of skills and problem solving I would bring to the IPRC director position. Okay, so we used a community-based participatory research process to choose interventions together, and then we've put those interventions into place. And along the way, we have trained a number of pre-doctoral fellows. So, okay, that is good for what I've been doing. Now I would like to move forward a little bit more quickly in giving you a snapshot of where I think IPRC stands and what may need to be done by, you know, the new director. And I want to apologize in advance. And that's not, and I say that because the data that's been available to me to do this has been from the annual report, and the last one that I've been able to get is 2010, and look at the IPRC website. So some of the things I'm aware, you know, you in the audience may be doing up-to-date things that I'm not aware of and are not in this data. So I apologize for that in advance. But this would be what an external person would be able to see if they were evaluating, looking at IPRC processes and what may need to happen. Okay, here's the 2010 funding portfolio, and what I've done in red is I have highlighted in red programs that have terminated or the funding is done. And the first one, the $500,000 there was from LongScan that is finished now. So what you see here, I'm showing you this because it's very clear that IPRC lives and has lived for a long time on federal funding. I don't see that that situation would change. I mean, there's difficulties. It's not like you can shift to funding from the state, for example, with our current fiscal situation. And simply, foundation funding just is not going to be able to replace this type of CDC funding. So what's critical, what's the most critical piece in terms of the center is the renewal application that I believe is due next year. Out of the three, well, you subtract the $500,000 from LongScan and you get about $2.6 million. Out of that, a little over $2 million is coming from the CDC. And it's coming in two core center grants. One being the IPRC core grant, and the second one being the NCA's project. So that's good news. I mean, we have two core center grants, which is extraordinary. I think Michigan has that, but there are very few other centers like this, IPRCs across the country, that actually have both types of grants. But it is very clear that the new the new IPRC director will have to craft a very innovative, competitive core center grant to keep things going, and will want to, compete on the next round as well for to keep the youth violence grant going as well. I would make that a priority. So most of the center funding portfolio is hinged on these two center grants. Okay. Now what I did is I went through the website and took a look at what the portfolio looked like, and you can see that IPRC has been really rooted in a number of different areas over its history, has been very dynamic in the number or the range of different topics in injury. And what I've done is I've looked at current funded projects, and that's what you see in the red after the area. So what you see is that we have one project in occupational injury, the child maltreatment, one project, and then intimate partner violence is a major focus of the Vanjie Foshi's work with the IPRC core grant. And then you have my grant with the youth violence. There's one other violence topic, I'm not sure exactly which one that is. But the thing that I think the new director has to look at is there's some areas that have been historically strong, but may not be active right now. And I think that we have to look at how do we manage that process? Do we want to continue to invest in 8 different areas, or is it better to try and refine or focus down on some of the more active areas? Now, I don't have an answer to you. What I would do as director is get together the stakeholders, just like I've been talking to many of them today, and pose that question to them. I mean, the director position I don't see as hierarchical or autocratic. There's a lot of stakeholders that in play here, and we would have to ask, though, the difficult questions when you look at something like this. What's the future look like? Do we have a strategic plan where we want to focus on a smaller number of areas? Do we want to try and get some of these other areas going? Here's the core faculty list and another affiliated issue. You can see that on the core faculty there's about 12, 14 people here, and there are projects. Carrie certainly has a project. The core grant is funding some projects under Steve. There's my NCA's project, and then Dr. Zolator has the Prolific Award for having two projects, but they may be terminating soon. So the issue here is that I think the IPRC director also needs to take a look at the core faculty. And indeed, I talked with them today, and there is some ambiguity about what does it mean to be a core faculty member? What are the expectations? And so I think that this also speaks to that. These are incredible people. This list is very important for the core center grant. But the day-to-day functioning of the center is also, and the growth of the center is focused on core faculty really increasing or adding new projects to the portfolio. And so speaking, I might sound a little bit like my retirement analyst, basically, but saying, this may not be as healthy and diverse a portfolio as we want for the future of IPRC. And what we need to do is engage core faculty, both those on this list and potential new core faculty, to bring them in to try and see how we can generate some new initiatives. So what would I do that speaks to some of the beginning things that I would do? I would ask some of the difficult questions that I really think that we need to think about, which have to do with the core faculty that I was just mentioning. You know, this portfolio, at least what I was able to look at, and again, there may be new initiatives that I'm not aware of or haven't heard about. Not being director at the moment, I'm not really aware. But that's another issue in terms of the core faculty. As a core faculty member, you know, I think I encapsulate some of the other issues that they may not be as aware, like I'm not. I think we meet once a year at the most. So I would like, as a director, to try and foster a more dynamic, kind of invigorated context where IPRC can have PIs coming and going and starting kind of new collaborative relationships. And in that, then being able to launch some projects together. So what would I do? I would ask these questions, engage the core faculty, try and figure out, you know, of these contributors to the center, who is really invested in building projects versus others who might want to mentor students and others who may want to be involved in our training program. So there's many roles that can be divvied up. So I'm not trying to be trying to emphasize lower inclusiveness. But what I am trying to emphasize is the director is going to need to engage PIs in order to grow some of these new initiatives that will make a more broad and dynamic funding portfolio. Okay. I think that there's also potential for cross-pollination between the centers on campus, and that's an important issue. In my own experience, for example, with the Robeson County work as just one aspect, the American Indian Center on campus is interested in collaborating, and I'm very interested in seeing how we can collaborate to enhance both of our goals. Centers like FPG or the Center for Developmental Science do longitudinal projects that may be very helpful in terms of launching longitudinal studies, for example, of youth aggression, bullying behavior, youth violence over time. And so I think that there's collaborations that could be really looked at. Now, we need to plan a core center grant that's very dynamic and competitive, and it may be that the project levels of funding for that grant are smaller. So we need to look at how we can do some dynamic work within kind of funding constraints. But I think as a potential director, I would start on that process very soon and engage faculty, both core faculty, current core faculty and potential ones, to try and build bridges across campus that can invigorate this core center grant proposal. We really would be well served in terms of the funding portfolio to try and increase some R01 proposals that I would try and spearhead both in my own work and collaborations and with other core faculty members across campus. And what I think as a big idea, I've been mentioning from my previous projects how I have an applied focus and an intervention-based focus. I showed you what I have been able to do in the last 2 years in Robeson County. And what I'd like to do is try and enhance the engaged scholarship focus that is already happening at IPRC, but I'd like to increase it 5 or 10-fold to make our work very responsive to different issues in communities across the state. Now that may not be able to be done in a $100,000 seed part of the core grant proposal, but for each of those seed projects, it can lead to community-based work that is a larger funding proposal. And where is this funding coming from? There are significant areas of federal funding that would allow for these type of intervention proposals. Okay, so I would invest heavily in this type of background. It's the expertise that I particularly bring to the position, but also one that I think that could lead us into being a leader in engaged scholarship for the university in violence prevention. So I think that, yep, I don't want to go past there, and this is a good time for me to open it up to any questions or comments that any of you have. I'm very happy to have a dialogue. Yes?
I'm Alan Delapeno with the State Health Department. You didn't mention the State Health Department.
Right. There's a long-standing relationship that I have been outside of. I know that Steve and Carol Runyon have worked with the State Health Department, and I think that is tremendous. I would like to continue the areas of strength for the center, and that's one of them. I know that, for example, the National Violent Death Reporting System was a collaboration with the North Carolina piece of it, and there's other things that I'm sure, as I apologized early on, I'm sure that you're doing multiple things with IPRC's center faculty that I'm not aware of. Scott is also on the advisory committee. Scott Proboschel is on the committee for my Youth Violence Center grant. So I believe that there's an important linkage there. That being said, you don't have any more money for us, do you? I assume not. So, but it's a very important relationship that needs to be nurtured further. It's a success that the center has had that needs further that I would try and continue. Mariana?
I just wanted to ask a question about your background is clearly very strong in the violence side of injury prevention, but the injury center and the field generally, has this unintentional injury and intentional injury combination. And just wondering if you could speak to your thoughts about, it sounds to me like that would be a pretty big expansion for you into a new area, and your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that it's a collaborative effort, and so I don't see myself as expanding. The role would be, the director would need to respect and support all these different types of research for diverse injury topics at the center. But that being said, I wouldn't necessarily see my own research as moving into unintentional injury. I think that it's important for me to acknowledge, who I am as a researcher, but also to respect, diversity from others. So you may be working on a topic that I can that feeds into the center or carries, occupational injury focus, is different from mine, but I would certainly, as a director, support diversity of work because the focus is much wider than my own particular part of the field. But this is a common thing. Sam is right here, and his focus is on autism research, but FPG does much more than has many more areas of inquiry, but he supports multiple ones. Yes, Karen?
I have a comment and a question. So my comment is that the funding portfolio looks really different than the 2010. And so I just wanted to let you know that as you kind of go on to make decisions and you're, that you are aware of that.
And that's in a good way or in a...
It's in a very good way. Yeah,
it's in a very good way.
And I'm going to defend myself. I've got more than one project.
Yeah,
so
well, and that's good. That's why, you remember, I apologized in advance.
Exactly. But I just want to let you know that, you know, as you go on to make, you know, decisions and things that that you might, I mean, the portfolio does look a little different. But my question is, what is your plan for junior faculty, for like developing junior faculty?
Yeah, I think junior faculty are an important part of the equation. We've been talking all day about, well, what are the factors that would lead faculty to choose the center IPRC over their home department, and some may have, that decision may cause stress depending on the perspective of their chairs. So I think that junior faculty would be key to be able to engage and especially bring into the core center grant is about a community of people. So you can take the chance on giving kind of a seed project with a junior faculty member when there's 6 projects in the portfolio, or 5, or however it will be chopped up. And as a junior faculty member, having gone through that process, getting seed funding for a smaller project that where I have latitude over $100,000, made me giddy at the time. So, and that developmentally then, what we want to do is have a long-term relationship so that those junior faculty, as they develop through their careers, still continue to have loyalty to IPRC and contribute to the portfolio. So I think that there's a lot of bridges to be made and some to be repaired across campus with the new director, and that's a main priority. What I saw today was a lot of energy, with the current staff and what you're doing and feeding that portfolio. But I think across campus relationships are more of a concern. And as the potential director, I would be really looking at how you build those bridges with the deans and chairs and associate deans, as well as bring new junior faculty especially into the fold. And then one thing that we really would have a strong ability to do is provide mentoring and resources at the level of junior faculty member that would be worthwhile.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
I'll ask another question. So I'm a little bit of an outsider. You described how you've built a center.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you want to leave that to go to something else? What's your motivation?
Yeah, I don't see it as leaving this center. And don't worry, Wanda. I see it as integrating the two, and what I've been in this position of having created this Youth Violence Center. It's within IPRC. It actually is, it's a very large piece, but sort of not a center that's recognized by the university. It's given me good administrative experience to try to move to the next level. But what I see is an integration of these two roles, and not necessarily leaving one, for the other. So this would be kind of an extension in terms of becoming a center director with a center that has a long-standing history and is recognized within the university and the larger injury community, of course. Whereas my other cooperative agreement is kind of a fledgling center. I am very committed to continuing that momentum that we have with the NCA's work, and extending it to to the overall IPRC if that's what works out. Other questions? Okay, great. I don't see any.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I want to encourage you.